that take place nationally as well as globally. The center looks to give a necessary impetus by inculcating an outlook amongst those future corporate professionals to question the various aspects of business and its interplay with society. Moving towards today's webinar, it shall be focused on corporate governance. For the purpose of same, we have with us the very eminent Mr. Tushar Himani, Senior Advocate, Gujarat High Court, founder, Lexperts Law Firm, and former President, ITAT Bar Association, Ahmedabad. It's an absolute privilege to have you amongst us, sir. The sessions will start by speakers introducing their topics. The same shall be followed by a speaker-moderator discussion. Finally, we'll open up the Q&A session for the audience. I request all of you to mute your mics and disable your video in order to avoid any possible connectivity issue. I would again want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining with us in this session. And without failing to address this, we would also present a heartfelt thanks to our media partner latestlaws.com and social partner Asha Akanksha Foundation. I would now request our moderator for the session, Center Head, Professor Amit Kumar Kashyap sir, to take the lead and advance with the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhishek. I welcome everyone to this webinar. Respected speaker for the today's webinar, Mr. Tushar Himani, Senior Counsel, Gujarat High Court, faculties of Institute of Law, Nirma University, members of Center for Corporate Law Studies, and dear participants. On behalf of Center for Corporate Law Studies, Institute of Law, Nirma University, I welcome you all to this webinar titled Corporate Governance, an Idealistic Notion or Need of the Day. This is our third webinar in the series, and I'm very much delighted to see young budding corporate lawyers joining us today on this Sunday. My name is Amit Kashyap. I am head of Center for Corporate Law Studies. The focus of this center basically revolves around a wide range of contemporaneous corporate law issues, and we always take endeavor to engage with students as well as with experts to talk on the contemporary issues which industry is facing in the business world. So with an objective to fulfill this discussions and these events, today's topic is very important and is of great relevance to the business and corporate law experts. As we know that corporate governance is the bedrock of successful long-lasting business. I would say that this corporate governance is just like salt in food. So without corporate governance, corporate law itself is incomplete, and there are a lot of norms. And when we go to understand about the corporate law and governance scenario in India, we have different regulators, we have a number of regulations that a company has to follow. So we are living in an entirely different way as if we compare it with the global scenario. In the last decade, we have also observed that corporate India have faced several challenges within the issue of governance and have frequently came under the microscope. Primarily, if I quote, is the latest default by NBFCs like ILNFS, DFSC. And also now the new pandemic of COVID-19 has brought a lot of challenges toward the corporate governance in the commercial transaction scenario. So I hope that today's discussion will help us understand the relevance of corporate governance and will also help us appreciate how laws are helping us to ensure greater transparency and accountability in the business world. I request everyone to please stay on mute till the sessions gets over. So we'll go around 45 minutes of the session by sir, and then we will keep 15 minutes of question answers to be addressed. So you are all open to write the questions that you have in your mind in between on the chat box. So we will try to take almost all the questions. And having said that, I would like to now sit with all the participants, and I will not like to further trespass your limited and valuable time. I request Tushar sir to deliver the session on the set topic. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Kashyap. Good afternoon, friends. At the outset, I'm grateful to Professor Kashyap, host Abhishek, and coordinator Varun for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts with these law students. Friends, the whole idea of corporate governance is more of a moral issue than a legal issue. I can't be governed if there is no will, there is no desire, there is no intent to be governed. And governance issue, as we will see, is such a tricky issue that people always find ways and means to avoid the real compliance. And that is the reason why it is all the more important to understand the concept in its true letter and spirit, that we not only understand the statutory and or regulatory framework of the corporate governance, but we also fulfill the requirements in true spirit and substance. And that is very important, because ultimately we are all lawyers or aspiring to be a lawyer. And I clearly remember that when I was studying, sometime in 1992, I graduated. And in 1993, probably, there was this movie, Philadelphia, starring Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington, which came out. And it probably, Tom Hanks won the Best Actor Academy Award for that movie. And there was one scene, one courtroom scene, which has stayed me forever. Probably that is something which has, made me think about law as a serious career opportunity. Because in 1993, frankly, I was doing my chartered accountancy in Mumbai. And at that time, there was no inclination to do law as such. But then there was this courtroom scene. The movie is about a young, very dynamic lawyer. Tom Hanks plays the part of Andrew Beckett. And he is diagnosed with HIV. During those days, HIV was, as dreadful a disease as COVID today. Maybe more than COVID. But then he was diagnosed with HIV positive, and he was wrongfully terminated. And he challenges that action of his wrongful termination through one lawyer, Joe Miller, played by Denzel Washington. And in one of these courtroom scenes, when he was asked a question that what is it that he loves the most about the profession of law? And this is what he answered. He says that every now and again, not very often, but occasionally, you get to be a part of justice being done. And that really is quite a thrill when that happens. So, we are all part of that process where we wait for, those rare occasions when justice is done. More often than not, nowadays, after having spent more than 20 years in the profession, I have realized one thing that, justice is usually kept at an arm's length distance from the day-to-day proceedings. We don't get to see justice being done. The laws are not followed in its letter and spirit. We follow the law because it is hurdle which has to be crossed by a particular businessman. Not that one wants to follow the law, but then law is something which is, unavoidable evil, I would put it that way, created by the government. And therefore we have to, cross that hurdle in order to carry on the business. And for a person like me, who is mainly into corporate taxation and corporate laws, it is more about dispute resolution rather than, a process of discovering the justice. Day in and day out, we resolve the dispute, maybe between two private parties or between, a private party and government, so on and so forth. And I call myself, a person who is engaged in redistribution of income or wealth, because almost 98% of my cases are about, redistribution of income. If someone is asked to pay more taxes, so government wants to take away part of his money, I come into the picture. If two shareholders are fighting for, that wealth, I come into the picture. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what I do is I facilitate the distribution of income amongst various participants. But then, look, the concept of justice and its implication on corporate governance is very, very paramount, for the simple reason that unless we follow the concept of justice, we won't be in a position to digest the concept of corporate governance. Looking to the definition of corporate, all of us are aware that corporate is a company. It is defined under the Companies Act, a company which is an artificial jurisdictional person. Governance is, the term which is derived from govern. Govern is to be conducted by, a person, a policy, or a set of laws with authority. So, corporate governance is basically a set of rules, a set of system, a process or principles which ensures that a company is governed in the best possible interest of all the stakeholders. Now, when I say all the stakeholders, I don't only restrict myself to the shareholders and the board of directors. Look, when we look at the larger picture, we find out that the stakeholders are many. We have the customers as one of the stakeholders. We have the suppliers as another set of stakeholders. We have the management, we have employees, we have government, we have society, country, industries, body, and probably humanities. So everything is in a way, a part of the larger system, a larger ecosystem where all of us are stakeholders. And, probably we'll see later on at a later stage that how the corporate governance affects each of these set of stakeholders. In other words, I would say that, a good corporate governance is a foundation for any corporate in any country to flourish. And if the better practices are followed by those who are at the helms of affairs, those who are in the process of implementing this corporate governance, then probably we can all have, a better corporate environment, which is conducive to the industry, which is, good for the economy of the country as a whole. And it is wealth creation in its best possible way. Look, broadly, when you look at the participants, you can apply the rule of 10, 10, 80. The rule of 10, 10, and 80 is that there are 10% of the citizens, there are 10% of the corporates, they have a scant regards for all these laws and regulations and bylaws. They are simply not going to follow any law. They are in the game of coming first and making the most amount of money, either for themselves or for the shareholders, and they just want to disappear once they make the money, and they are not at all interested in complying with any of the laws. So we are again not concerned with that set of people, because those 10% are not at all relevant for our discussion. We have another set of 10%. This 10% population is extremely law-abiding population. They are extremely compliant about various rules, regulations, laws which are there. They don't try to violate any of the provisions in its letter or spirit, and they are the ideal population. They are the ideal citizens. Again, I have nothing to talk about those 10%, because they are also, again, I would say that they don't need this discussion. It's the remaining 80% where the compliance is respected, it is followed in letter but not in full spirit. So what happens is, they are the persons who go by the law. They try to apparently, ostensibly, they try to follow the law. However, they are always searching for loopholes. They are always, in the need of a legal opinion, because they want to adventure. They want to, get out of this legal tangle so as to do things which they know, because they are conscious. They are literate. They know that this is something which is not otherwise permissible. However, because they know that the law is worded in such a way that they can take advantage of the situation, and they will fight with the authorities, they will fight with the shareholders, and ultimately at the end of the day, they will get the things done. So these are the population. These are the people which are, frankly, the topic of discussion for today. They are the people who would like to follow the law, apparently, but not in its true spirit and substance. Let's first look at the broad framework of corporate governance, and then we'll come to some of the specific issues. And as and when I come across some real life example, I'll discuss that example also, the real life case study, insofar as those issues are concerned. We have, India is fortunate right from 1996, when the word corporate governance started catching the frenzy of the corporate world. We in India started maybe late, sometime in 2000, but the preparation started much before that. And we now today, as of today, we have a very solid regulatory framework which is controlling all aspects of corporate governance. The main the main section which governs the particular field is the Companies Act 2013. With the introduction of Companies Act 2013, many concepts which were otherwise academic concepts have now been converted into statutory concepts. We have now the concept of an independent director. I'll come to that in a short while from now. We have the concept of a resident director, a director who is in India for more than 182 days. We have a concept of a woman director. If it's a listed company, we need at least one woman director. We have the concept of small shareholders director. A small shareholders director represent the small shareholders who are holding shares less than 20,000 rupees in nominal value. We have the concept of directors' responsibility statement. We have the concept of board meetings being governed in a particular way. The board processes are governed in a particular way. We have a model. We have a reporting mechanism whereby we can evaluate the performance of the board of directors. We have a provision whereby third-party related transactions are all deeply scrutinized, not only by the board of directors, but by the audit party, and appropriate disclosure to that effect is also there inbuilt into the financial reporting that we do at the end of the year. We have audit committees. Now, again, audit committees are given a lot of power and lot of freedom to exercise every due diligence possible, conceivable. And these are all welcome signs. These are all signs where we know that we have a robust the statutory provision mechanism which controls the entire field of corporate governance, and nothing is left to the discretion of the directors. Everything, more or less, all compliances are inbuilt into the statutory framework. And I believe that we have one of the better laws, in fact, in the form of Companies Act 2013. Look, broadly, if we look at the Companies Act, because now we are there, let's try to understand the broad framework of the Companies Act and how it affects the functioning of corporate governance. We have, under the Companies Act, now the concept is one of, independent director. Independent director is someone who is appointed by the board of director. By the board of directors, the appointment is again taking place in the AGM. Board of director identifies a particular person to be eligible to act as an independent director. The appointment is by the shareholders in the annual general meeting. The law prescribes the qualification of independent directors. The remuneration which is to be given to the independent director is also prescribed. Those directors are not entitled to any stock options. They have the maximum tenure of 5 plus 5, 10 years, and thereafter there is a 3 years cooling off period. These directors have to follow the very strict code of conduct. Their code of conduct is again prescribed under Schedule 4. their roles, their duties, the reappointment terms, all these things are now inbuilt. I'm not troubling you with all this minute details, because I'm sure that you guys are going to learn that during your classroom interactions. What we try to do is we are trying to have the holistic, larger picture. Uh, the reappointment of independent director is also there. What is most important is, look, the reason why we have independent director is that board of director is a closely knit group of people who are all interested either in their employment capacity or in their ownership capacity to maximize the profit for the company. However, the company is owned by the shareholders and some the stakeholders, namely company is owned by the shareholders, and there are some interests which are beyond the shareholding, namely the banks, etc., who have lent money for a long period, for a long term lending. Those people are also interested in managing the company in a particular manner. Now, this management is done by the board of directors, and we need a person who is not influenced by this board of directors to oversee the day-to-day management, the crucial operating and or other decisions which are very crucial uh, in managing the company, in seeing to it that the company grows, however, not at the cost of shareholders. So this independence director's job is more of a watchman. They are there to keep an eye on the working of the other members of the board. And now we have the statutory mechanism whereby these independent directors are placed in the board of directors. And every listed company, if the chairman is non-executive, then 50%, one third. And if it is the chairman is executive, we have 50% independent directors or non-executive directors. These directors are given the task of keeping an eye on the functioning of the board of directors. Their role is that of a watchdog. The moment there is a problem, the moment there is deviation, they need to bark. They need to immediately alert the shareholders that, sir, there is something with the board which is not right. There is some decisions which are not properly taken. They are taken maybe not in a very conducive manner, and therefore you need to look into those decisions. For that, in fact, the Companies Act also provides that at least once in a year there is going to be a meeting of the independent directors of the board without other directors being present. So these independent directors having an independent meeting can evaluate the functioning of the board, and they can amongst themselves exchange the ideas. They can amongst themselves find out as to what is it that is not right in a particular day-to-day working of the company, or some decisions which are long-term decisions, namely floating of a subsidiary, or erecting a plant in a particular region. All those decisions are again deeply scrutinized by the independent directors. There is one area where probably I'll make a reference at the end. That is the process of appointment of the independent director itself is where the maybe some problems are there. But then we will discuss that when we go to the end. Then Companies Act also has created large number of board committees, and predominant among them is the audit committee. Section 177 of the Companies Act, read with Rule 6 of the Companies meeting of the board and its power rules. Every limited company has to have an audit committee. Now, what is it that this audit committee does? Broadly speaking, the audit committee audits everything. Now, what does an auditor do? Auditor in a normal circumstance would try to find out what is wrong, what is not done as per the system. Now, systems are in place. We have large number of laws, bylaws, regulations, whereby the system is set up by each and every corporate, which is a listed corporate. The work of the audit committee is to see to it that the board and the key managerial personnel, they follow this system in letter and spirit. So if at all audit committee finds that there is some deviation in approving the purchases from an associate concern, there is going to be a red flagging with those purchases. Audit committee would question those transactions, that these are the transactions which are not normal. They appear to be slightly abnormal. You explain us this. And everything is minutized. All these questions, all these answers, all aspects are minutized minutely, so that at a later stage, if at all, during the shareholders meeting, if any questions are asked about these transactions, then the audit committee can say that we have gone into this, we have looked into this, and our answer to this is this. This is basically anti-fraud or a visual mechanism whereby the crucial decisions, they are reviewed, they are reaffirmed, and if at all they are not right, they are questioned, and the things are set right. In fact, under the new Companies Act, even the whistleblower mechanism, which is there in the new Companies Act, is also made a part of the audit committee. Let us spend some time over this whistleblower mechanism. Whistleblower mechanism is basically a mechanism whereby any person, maybe directly connected or not directly connected, if at all he believes that something is not right, then he can blow the whistle and draw the attention of the board. The board would look into the particular aspect and hand over the matter to the audit committee for further scrutiny and clarifications. And based on the findings of the audit committee, either the case is taken forward or case is closed over there. Because many a times the experience is that this whistleblowing is maybe because of some personal animosity or because of some exterior motives. More often than not, they are not right. However, many a times these whistleblowers do a great service to the company and to the shareholders at large. And, those are the cases where the audit party is then given a very important task of handling this complaint mechanism. Let us take the example of, the ICICI Bank. All of you are aware that ICICI Bank had a very dynamic CEO and the main person in the name of Chanda Kochhar. Chanda Kochhar was handling the ICICI for quite some time, and she was in fact the blue-eyed boy of the board of directors. Some of her decisions were not very right, according to now that the things are coming out. We can gauge that some of the decisions taken by her or by the board of directors when she was the head of the board of directors were not very right. More particularly, the decision of advancing huge sum of money to one Videocon company. More than 4,000 crores were lent by ICICI Bank to Videocon. And one interesting aspect was not properly disclosed, and that aspect was that the husband of Chanda Kochhar, Deepak Kochhar, had a partnership with one of the main promoters of Videocon Group, namely Venugopal Dhut. And they started a company, RE Power. And in that company, private limited company, there was some investment by the Dhut. And the timing of the investment was such that as and when the loans were disbursed from ICICI to Videocon companies, money used to be invested in that company of husband of Chanda Kochhar. One whistleblower, Arvind Gupta probably, he drew the attention of the board that there is something wrong with the way in which these loan transactions are happening. In 2016, audit committee considered that particular aspect, and 2016 the case was closed. One independent law firm was also appointed for the purpose of carrying out the inquiries into this. That also came positive. Again, that particular whistleblower put this the entire case in his personal blog, and from that blog it was picked up by some newspapers, because most of the newspapers were carrying huge amount of advertisement for ICICI banks, and therefore they did not pick up this story. Indian Express probably picked up this story, and then the Vigilance Commission, the Prime Minister's office, the Finance Minister's office, SEBI, all those agencies, and thereafter ultimately CBI and ED, they got involved. And ultimately in 2018, late 2018, Chanda Kochhar was asked to resign from the board of directors of the ICICI Bank Limited. And the whole thing now, in hindsight, in retrospect, it feels that maybe the audit committee, when it was seized of the matter, did not pay full attention to the facts which were brought to its notice. And they, instead of acting independently in the interest of the shareholders, they acted in the interest of the board of directors and the CEO. So the audit committee is that way. It performs a very important task of keeping an overall vigil over the functioning of the board of directors, and therefore they are given a very huge amount of power. And if the powers are properly utilized, probably they can act as a watchdog over the entire system. Then we have nomination and remuneration committee, which looks after the remuneration and nomination of various persons in the various committees. There also there are counter checks and balances, that one person cannot be part of large number of committees. The remuneration is controlled, and most of the remuneration of the key managerial personnel are approved by the shareholder in their meeting. We have now, under the new Companies Act, Stakeholders Relationship Committee, which maintains the relationship with the small time shareholders, debenture holders, and other such persons. The second counterpart of entire corporate governance process is the listing agreement, and more particularly clause 49 of the listing agreement. Clause 49 is basically, it deals with the corporate governance in its present stand. We had various committees looking into these aspects of corporate governance and how best practices from across the globe can be incorporated into our listing agreement. We had Kumar Mangalam Birla committee, we had Naresh Chandra committee, Narayan Murthy committee. Now all these committees' report is now combined, and it is placed into clause 49 of the listing agreement. We have a standard listing agreement across the stock exchanges, namely BSE and NSE, whereby this agreement has to be signed by the proposed companies before they get listed on the stock market. Here also there are large number of checks and balances. Some of the prominents are independent director. Again, here they put the restriction that maximum 3 listed company can have a whole-time independent director. So a person acting as a whole-time independent director in a company cannot have the directorship in more than 3 companies. And the remaining cases, it is not more than 7 companies. So we do not have, those independent directors who are independent director in more than 25, 30 companies, and they can't, pay any attention to any of these companies. So there is this check whereby the number of companies in which a person can become an independent director is also restricted. Their compensation, their remuneration, the various disclosure, the code of conduct which has to be followed by them is all monitored by, again, clause 49 in synchronization with the Companies Act. Again, the audit committee is also there, one of the predominant feature of clause 49. And audit committee does various functions which are now again embedded into 2013 Act. The financial accounts, they are now to be certified by the board of directors and CEO, CFO before they are given for the audit. Once the auditor gives the certification, they are placed before the shareholder, and the shareholders in their annual general meeting, they give the approval to the accounts. So accounts now also has this disclosure on corporate governance. There is a paragraph which is devoted to this, that how reporting on corporate governance is required to be done. That format is also prescribed in Annexure 13 to clause 49. They prescribe that these are the findings, these are the requirements of the report on corporate governance. Then we have various statutory provisions, namely SEBI guidelines. We have accounting standards issued by Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. We have secretarial standards issued by Institute of Company Secretaries of India. We have other laws which, in a very cursory manner, they touch upon the aspect of corporate governance, namely competition law, FEMA laws, Income Tax Act, where related party transactions are required to be disclosed, and certain other transactions which are, hitting the provisions of general anti-avoidance rules, they are also required to be properly disclosed in the tax audit report. So these are the requirements. To to me, it appears that, look, we have some of the best laws one can, even conceive, one can contemplate. The best legal framework is there. But then, despite this best legal framework, where do we lack? The lacking is from the intention. Look, howsoever strong, howsoever good laws that we draft, unless there is a participation, unless there is an intention to abide by the law, that is there, nothing can be done. People will always find the ways and means to avoid the larger governance issue. They would say that, yes, we are following the various guidelines issued by SEBI, the Companies Act, our reporting is perfect. But at the end of the day, you find that, yes, this company is lacking in its corporate governance. And how do we say that? Let's take the recent example. Look, the recent example is one of having conflict with China. We are not having a very cordial relationship with China at the moment, and then the whole nation is now, going after the Chinese product. We are all, in a way, avoiding the China genesis, the China-made products, or the products which are having, some connection with China. So this is also part of the larger corporate governance, because I mentioned earlier that the stakeholders are, even the nation is a stakeholder in any corporate, and therefore the duty of the corporate even is to the nation. So when it comes to avoiding the Chinese product, if I look at my bottom line, I would say that, I can't, avoid the importation of this particular raw material from China. If I do that, I'll have next 3 quarters in red. And I have to show a huge amount of losses. If I do that, I'll lose the investors' confidence, I'll lose the shareholders, and I'll lose the market cap in terms of, monetary loss. So therefore, I either keep quiet, or I try to, avoid the China connection. I set up, a dummy supplier in Dubai or in Singapore or in other such, Philippines, Indonesia. That company in turn, gets the material from some other company, and then that company in turn can get the material from China. So I know that I have, avoided this obvious scrutiny, the Chinese scrutiny. However, I have, in the true letter and spirit, not followed the issue of nationalism, and therefore I have failed in my corporate governance. So this is one example that if you really don't want to follow the law in its letter and spirit, then you can always find some ways, some some other medium whereby this can be avoided. That would take me to the 4 pillars, the 4 pillars of the corporate governance. That how do we make sure that the laws are there, the regulations are there, the bylaws are there, all those code of conduct, the guidelines, everything is there in place. However, at the end of the day, something would turn on these 4 pillars. The first pillar is that the board must be responsible. The board has to act with full responsibility. If the board fails in acting with full responsibility, then probably the board is not following the corporate governance. The responsibility is not defined under any dictionary. It is not defined under any statutory book either. However, when we look at the case, we know that, yes, here is a failure of the board in acting with full responsibility. Let me tell you a story of one old bank known as Barings Bank. This was one of the oldest investment bank of Britain. In fact, Queen Elizabeth II was a client of this bank, Barings Bank. It collapsed sometime in 1995. The reason was that there was this arbitrage trader, Nick Leeson. He was all of 28 years of age, and he was handling the derivative desk in Singapore. He was doing a lot of arbitrage trades. Now, what is an arbitrage trade? Arbitrage trade is that where there are buying and selling happening simultaneously, maybe buying in present, selling in future, and there is a small margin to be earned. Or reverse, vice versa, selling in present, buying in future. And, that way, the companies make small money, because what I do is effectively, let's say today in sport, Reliance is 1700 rupees. I buy Reliance, one share of Reliance today at 1700 rupees. Simultaneously, I also execute one contract whereby I agree to sell Reliance maybe 30 days down the road at 1701 rupees. So there is a margin of 1 rupee to be earned from these two trades, because I have hedged myself, because these two trades are compensating trades. At the end of the day, if at all I lose anything, I only lose the premium. Uh, However, this neat lesson, what he did was, he only executed one part of the transaction. And how did that happen? Because he was given the task of entering the trades. He was also given the task of writing and monitoring the books of accounts and settling the trades. Now, board of director, they failed in their responsibility in assigning all these three tasks to one person. Everybody knows now, people have become wiser. Now we have checks and counter checks, and this kind of situation is impossible in today's corporate world. However, 25 years back, because of this one wrong, irresponsible decision by the board, the bank collapsed, because he created such a situation whereby his gamble ultimately made the bank lose more than $1 billion during those days, and bank was not in a position to pay off that money. Ultimately, the bank collapsed, and now the bank no more exists. The Barings Bank, one of the oldest investment bank, ceased to exist because the board of directors of Baring Bank did not act in a responsible manner. So the board has to act in a responsible manner. Now, what is that responsible manner? We do not know. But then we expect that board of directors, they act in a very, very responsible manner, so as to carry out the business in a very conducive manner. Second is, the accountability. The second part, which for today's discussion, is that accountability of the board. The board needs to be accountable for all its actions. Now, each and every action, we all know, that can be questioned by large number of committees, independent directors, shareholders in the AGM. So board needs to act in a very accountable manner, and accountability is something which goes hands in hand with the corporate governance. That if at all the board of director acts in a manner which is not in a proper way, then that is not how the board should exercise their discretion. So the accountability is the second pillar, which says that every action and their reactions can be questioned, and board is 100% fully accountable for these actions. Look, I have given the example of the ICICI Bank. I'm sorry. I have given the example of ICICI Bank. I would give an example of the accountability aspect insofar as Satyam is concerned. Let's say the Satyam Computers case is a well-known case. What had happened was that the accounts were fudged, and nobody questions those accounts, not even the auditors. Classic example, what had happened was that Satyam fudged his books of accounts. It showed certain sales which never took place. Those sales were booked. However, once you book the sales, you need to show the income. You need to show that monies have been received from the customers. So Satyam also fudged that yes, monies are received. They are received, and they are now parked in the form of FDRs, fixed deposit receipts. Now, those fixed deposit receipts were all fudged. They did not exist. They were all fictitious receipts. Auditor never took the pains to physically verify those. Neither the audit committee, because during those days those things were not there, nor any other member of the board took note of this particular aspect, and ultimately the company failed. The company had to suffer a huge loss on account of all these abnormalities. So the moment you find that board is not acting accountably, the board is not acting in a way it is answerable to persons. The moment, I would put it this wise, the moment board starts acting as if it has not to answer anyone, then that is a serious crisis of corporate governance, and that is something which has to be avoided. The second part is the fairness part. The third pillar of the corporate governance is the fairness. The governance has to be fair to all the stakeholders. Look, my suppliers, my customers, my shareholders, all are stakeholders, and they all expect some fairness when it comes to dealing with them. When it comes to dealing with all the stakeholders, the least that a company can do is to be fair. Now, before the buyback decision is taken by the board of directors, if I tell my friends and relatives, I happen to be the director of a company, I tell my friends and relatives that, sir, this company is coming out with a buyback, and you go in the market and, purchase some shares in advance, that is not acting in a fair manner, though it is a crime now because I'm sharing inside information and SEBI laws prohibit that. But that apart, it's something which is, not acting in a fair manner. I have informed my counterparts, I have informed my friends and relatives to take undue benefit. We have the cases where, companies, the private limited companies getting merged into the listed entities with higher valuation than what it is. With this higher valuation is an highly unfair act on the part of the board of directors and the stakeholders, namely the majority ownership stakeholders. What they do is they, inflate the values of these shares of this private limited company, and they ultimately, get it merged with the limited company so as to extract more number of shares of the listed company. And the last part is the conduct, the overall conduct of the board. It speaks for itself. Look, the conduct is why is it that the conduct is very important? Because if you look at the conduct, you pick up any balance sheet, you try to read the notes to accounts, and you find out that the contingent liabilities which are written over there, whether they are the actual liabilities which are being, now colored as contingent liabilities, the conduct of the parties. There are related party transactions. You look at the balance sheet and try to find out the related party transactions because they are specifically categorically reported over there. You see the pattern that if the related party transactions are substantial and if they are being executed on a very routine manner and not at an arm's length price, then you know that these transactions are not showing the proper conduct. Look, if you really want to look at the conduct of the parties, then you look at the sexual harassment policies of that particular organization, because employees are also part of the larger ecosystem, and the companies which are having good relations with the employees, they are expected to be nice to the shareholders also. Take the example of Infosys. Once upon a time, there was this director Phanish Murthy working for Infosys, and he was charged with some sexual harassment case, and Infosys eventually asked him to resign from the company. He was compelled to leave the company, and that set a very good example that how the corporate governance can be encompassing the employees and how they make employees feel safe in the larger environment. These are the four issues which would create the foundation. Let me conclude now that why do I say that whether these are idealistic notions and why they are need of the day. Look, we are going through a very, very unprecedented times. This is a very tough time for the entire corporate world, and my estimate is that in the next 2 quarters, the results are going to be extremely difficult. The whole economy is contracting. The economy is, shrinking probably at the rate of 4.5% as per the latest figure of IMF. So we are all going to see a lot of financial pains that is going to be felt across the board. That the suppliers, customers, shareholders, the employees, the companies, the bankers, the exchequer in the form of collection of various taxes, all these stakeholders are going to feel the pinch of this recession. And the recession is for real. The way in which this pandemic is acting uncontrollably, that the way in which it is spreading, probably for next 2 quarters, we'll see all these pains. And if I can quote Warren Buffett, he said that it is only during this low tide that we get to know that who is swimming naked, who is swimming without a swimming costume. So this is a low tide period, and we will know the parties, the corporates which are acting without proper corporate governance in place. If these parties are exposed, then those parties can be avoided, those shares can be avoided, and the parties, the corporates which are actually following the corporate governance in its true spirit and substance, they would thrive. People would put more trust. In fact, look, why do people try to violate the corporate governance guidelines, and why do they act in a very a manner in which they do? It's only because they either want some short-term gain, they want to generate some gain out of the transaction, or they want to do some favor to their friends and relatives. These are the only two conceivable reasons why a corporate behaves or violates the model code of corporate governance. Now, the experience shows that the companies, namely HDFC Twins, the Infosys, Tata Motors, Dr. Reddy's Laboratories, Tata Consultancy Services, all these companies, they are the epitome of corporate governance. They follow the governance in its true letter and spirit. And look at the valuation. Look, if you compare one-to-one basis, HDFC Bank and ICICI Bank, both are almost at par. The value of per share of HDFC Bank is 1,000 plus, whereas that of ICICI Bank is 350 rupees. And mind you, the face value of HDFC share is 1 rupee, whereas that of ICICI Bank is 2 rupees, double the face value. Despite that, we see such a large, huge gap in the valuations. Both are private sector bank, both are predominant bank, both have a very good balance sheet, very robust business across the country. Nonetheless, despite that, we see such a stark difference in the valuation. Why? Because of the corporate governance. So in the long run, even if you want to make money, even if you want to get rich, my suggestion is follow the corporate governance and get rich in a very legitimate way, rather than taking the shortcuts and generating some small amount of money for your associate concern or for your other activities. It is better to follow, even if the money making is your main criteria, then also in the long run you make more money by being corporate governance compliant. The way forward is we need some changes in the entire legal framework, but more than that, more than the legal framework, we need change in the corporate mindset. Once people understand that by being a good company following the corporate governance in its true letter and spirit, we can generate more value, more wealth for all the stakeholders, rather than taking any shortcuts. So my final take on the entire discussion is that it is better to be corporate governance compliant rather than violating any of these provisions, even if you want to create wealth or money for your personal self. Thank you very much. I really once again appreciate the organizers in giving me this platform to share some of my thoughts. Thank you, Professor Kashyap and Abhishek. I invite question answers now, if at all.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for all your valuable thoughts. And you have touched almost all the corners of corporate governance, which are required to be deliberated. There are very good questions posed by our participants. So I'll take first question for you. One of our participant, Shailaja Tripathi, want to know is the importance of SEBI LODR and the impact of its frequent amendments which has been made in last 3 years. So
right.
So how you take on this?
Look, as I stated earlier, that we have some of the best laws in the entire world. It's not that we lack in rule making ability. We have some of the best practices. In fact, all the 3 committees, and thereafter SEBI is consistently amending the corporate governance, because it's a dynamic concept. Every now and then we learn new things about corporate governance. We try to incorporate those things into laws and bylaws and regulations. But then ultimately, at the end of the day, as I stated, that it is the intent. It is ultimately the corporate education. It is the willingness on the part of the board to abide by the law, which going to, in the long run affect the economy and the corporate world at large.
So One of our participants want to know that, and many of them have asked this question, that how exactly corporate social responsibility of a company is part of corporate governance, as we have the
Let,
provisions that it is, I
let,
mean, it is mandatory. Yeah.
yes. Let me give you an example. Look, there was this company. I would not name the company, but there is this listed company which is in the process of creating value for its shareholders. In the process of manufacturing, they generate large amount of effluents. Now, the practice has shown that if the effluents are required to be discharged in the legal manner, in the manner in which the law, namely the Pollution Control Board and Central Pollution Control Board, require them to do, it you know incurs it entails a lot of expenditure on the part of the company in setting up the effluent treatment plant. So some of the board members, they suggested that let us dispose of this effluent in the canal. No one will come to know. So they started discharging that effluent into the canal. Then came a thought that canal water is now detected by the municipality because they have put some sensors. So we need to find a different way of discharging this. So what they started doing was they started digging up, the borewells in their factory premises and started injecting the effluent into those borewells. Uh, they saved a lot of money. They saved a huge sum of money, which in turn ultimately increased their EPS, earning per share, which in turn increased the shareholders' value, which in turn created a comfort level for the bankers, which in turn created the comfort level for FIIs to make investment in the company. However, who suffered? The stakeholder, namely the society, suffered. Because I mentioned earlier that society is also one of the stakeholders, because corporate governance is a dynamic concept. Every day we keep on learning the new things, new facets of corporate governance. This is one of those issues where, in the process of generating value for one set of stakeholders, we have, created a damage which is probably irreparable for another set of stakeholders. And when we try to balance these two, gain and damage, probably we find that the damage is much worse than the gain which is made by the one set of stakeholders. Therefore, what has to be kept in mind as a responsible board of director is that yes, we want to make money, but not at the cost of forgetting our corporate social responsibility. So that way, this example can probably put your doubts to rest, that corporate social responsibility of a particular corporation is very much inbuilt part of a corporate governance. And the way in which they behave with the society, with the environment, with the national issues, again says a lot about their corporate governance practices.
Of course, sir, I completely agree with you. We have already examples of some of the companies like Reliance and Tata who are doing a lot in corporate social responsibility, and and it's not the responsibility of the company only. Stakeholders also have to involve. In continuation to this, there is one question by our participant, that what is the role of institutional investors in ensuring corporate governance? So basically, many of them want to know about the shareholders' activism, that how shareholders should ensure corporate governance to be obeyed by the company.
Look, shareholders, the first thing they can do is they can ask a lot of questions. They have now the right to ask the questions. Even now, we have under the Companies Act, a minority director is also there. The minority shareholders director can also be elected and placed in the board of directors. If the question was with respect to FIIs or institutional investors, then probably they can do a lot better than what they are doing as of today. Look, they have the institutional investors, the DIIs, we call them domestic institutional investors. They have a right of, placing a nominee director in the board of directors by virtue of, they are giving any loans, or if at all, it's pure and simple investments by purchasing some shares from the stock market. Then probably what they can do is they can, appoint an independent expert advisor who can track a particular company, who can question the board of directors by sending them on regular basis questionnaires. On their website, the institutional investors can also place on record for the larger public to know that these are the decisions taken by the company, and this is how we have voted, either in favor of those decisions and against the decisions, and the reason why. Because ultimately, those institutional investors are well-informed investors. They are the investors who are having all kind of requisite capability to examine a balance sheet, to examine the business proposal, to critically analyze some of the decisions of the company. They are better placed than an individual investors, and therefore they must utilize that better capacity to do a larger good, and that larger good can only be done by sharing information. So they can do all these things either by sharing the information on their websites that yes, we are the shareholder of a particular company, and that company was in the process of setting up of a plant. However, we have voted against the setting up of a plant because of there was no environmental clearance from the concerned ministry. Or we believe that such a massive capital investment in setting up of a plant to supply the raw material can easily be avoided, because this is at the moment business is not very good. So these are some of the examples where this DIIs or domestic institutional investors or FIIs can increase and enhance the shareholders' value.
And even I believe that they have a larger role to play because they invest huge amount of money, and they have greater responsibility to participate very actively. And I think that shareholders also follow the institutional investors in deciding as to how to participate in the company. Right. Our next question is related to a very recent event that has happened, that is Vizag gas leak case, wherein participants want to know that there is any role of employees in the board of directors. So do you think that employees representation should be there, and how the employees can participate in shareholders activism and in corporate governance? And basically with respect to the Vizag gas leak case, which has also shown failure of corporate governance.
Look, employees, they can always, they are part of the internal process. So every company has a check and balance system whereby the employees can, bring to notice some of the things to their immediate superiors. If they believe that those things are not being, particularly addressed or they are not being considered by the immediate superior, what they can do in turn is they can become a whistleblower by filing a complaint before the audit committee. Audit committee would certainly take into consideration any of these issues, because they are in a way having a supervisory role over the board when it comes to certain issues. And one of the issue is a whistleblower. A whistleblower could be an employee also, and that employee can file a complaint or can make suggestions for the good of the company, if at all those things are internally not possible. But believe me, nowadays almost all listed companies, look, private limited companies and the private companies, they work in a different way. They are still in that era of proprietorship concern. But most of the private public limited listed companies, they have a very robust MIS system, and this information system takes care of all kinds of eventuality, and employees are always heard. There is a specific mechanism whereby employees can get together on a particular day. They exchange the thoughts with their higher superior authorities, and they give suggestions. They criticize the decisions. They take the management as to how and in what manner they can they can expand, or they can do the backward or forward integration. All these thoughts, because they are the persons who are working at the grassroots level, they are at the shop floor level, and they know the reality better than the management people. And therefore corporates nowadays take the employees very seriously.
Thank you, sir. Varun, you have any question?
Yes, sir. So my question to you is that since we have multiple regulators in India governing different and similar institutions, how far do you see the role of RBI should be enhanced in the corporate governance of these institutions, apart from the roles as assigned to SEBI under SCRA and SEBI Act, in the light of recent scams such as DHFL and ILFS?
Look, they both operate in a different sphere. The RBI is mainly concerned with the banks, even the cooperative banks are also put under the purview of RBI. Recently, there was this RBI Act amendment. If at all a corporate, let's say Yes Bank, Yes Bank is a listed entity, so SEBI also has a jurisdiction, and it is a scheduled bank. So RBI also has a role to play in so far as the fiasco is concerned, the scam is concerned. However, we cannot have RBI, taking action against, let's say, Reliance Industries. Supposing there is some problem with the Reliance Industries, or for that matter, any listed company. You cannot have RBI, exercising some jurisdiction over that default or that particular problem, because it is the prerogative of the Ministry of Commerce, the corporate ministry. The SEBI under the Companies Act, ROC is given power, RD is given power. We have serious fraud investigation agency, and so on and so forth. If at all it's a criminal conspiracy, we have ED, we have CBI. So these are all the agencies which are already there in the particular field. RBI is only concerned with the Banking Regulations Act, and my personal belief is that if at all a listed entity is in the nature of NFC or a private bank, then probably RBI is more appropriate. And then, as all of us has witnessed, it took some very bold decision when it came to reviving Yes Bank. And a timely action has probably saved the day for the time being for the stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. So we have almost addressed all the questions that were there from the participant side, and mostly people want to know more about corporate social responsibility. I think they are more interested to know that whether CSR have any tax benefit also for the companies, and how companies manage corporate social responsibility and corporate governance.
Look, CSR as of today does not have any tax benefit, for the simple reason that if the company is required to spend 100 rupee, the government says that why should we bear the burden of 65 rupees? Because the moment you start giving the tax benefit, then every 100 rupees spent would end up saving 35 rupees for the company, and that 35 rupees is claimed as an expenditure from the exchequer's purse. And
True.
Therefore, that 35 is cross-subsidized by the government of India. So, government is very clear. They are saying that it is not entitled. However, there are some loopholes, some sections somewhere which says that if at all I am not claiming the expenditure under Section 37 of the Income Tax Act, and if I am claiming that under Section 35 or some other section, then probably I can claim it as an allowable expenditure, because the prohibition is only under Section 37, namely the Residuary Act. So under Section 35, if I supposing give a donation to a company or a university or some other agency which is carrying on the research in the field of corporate social responsibility, which is an eligible expenditure, then probably I can claim that expenditure. But then these are all, again, as I stated earlier, not following the law in its true spirit and letter. If a part of the turnover is required to be spent as a corporate social responsibility, then you can't avoid that. You have to spend that much amount for the purpose of creating awareness about some issues. In fact, even way back, probably in 1970s, we had all these companies, the Sarabhais and Lalbhais and all those. They are the founders of Ahmedabad University, and all these nice museums that you see, NID, IIM. All these are part of the larger corporate social responsibility initiatives of those parties, those corporates. So even before this was made as a statutory provision, there are a large number of corporates who are very active in providing this payback to the society. And once they are doing it, probably the fact that they are not getting any income tax deduction for that is a matter of probably no consequence. And a sign of a good corporate governance is that you take into consideration the interests of all the stakeholders. Supposing I create value for my stakeholders, but I don't pay my suppliers. I'm not a running the company in a very conducive manner. I do third-party transactions with my relatives and pass on the profit to them. I'm not very good at corporate governance. In this COVID-like situation, if I compel my employees to come to office and physically be present in the office because we want to run the company and we are in the business of making money, if that is my corporate governance mantra, then probably I'm not following the corporate governance, because my corporate social responsibilities are also of paramount importance. I'm not a money-making machine. Look, that's the whole idea. The idea is that government, the lawmakers, the parliament, the legislator, all of them, they want that you act in a very responsible manner. It's not that once you become a corporate, your sole purpose is to make money and enrich your shareholders. That is not the idea. Idea is you behave like a model citizen. We don't spit on the street. We don't litter. We don't do any anti-national activities. We pay our taxes. These are all the signs of model citizens, and for this I don't get a prize because I'm supposed to do this. I'm required to do this. The same way, in the long run, we want the corporates to act in a very responsible manner, where the interest of all the stakeholders is taken care of. And one of the stakeholders is a society, because unless the society is duly taken care of, none of us can survive in the long run.
Yeah. So one last question that we will take. We discussed about the maintenance and importance of books of accounts looked by the audit committee. Currently, all business transactions are carried out on the basis of GPay via UPI, but RBI considered such transactions as not legal and not valid. So, if such companies show these types of transaction, will it amount to be forged transactions?
GPay is Google Pay?
Yeah, Google Pay.
So these are all basically UPI based transactions.
Yes. Sir.
So UPI based transactions, they are now recognized. In fact, under the Income Tax Act, under various GST Act also, these transactions are recognized transactions. And the sections where cash transactions are prohibited, they specifically say that if it is an electronic transfer of funds, like electronic wallets or UPI transactions, those are all permissible transactions. So even if a company enters into these transactions, they are all permissible transactions, and none of the authorities are going to question it. Not even auditors are going to qualify those transactions. So GPay transactions, UPI based, Paytm transactions, all this phone pay, all these are perfectly legitimate way of transacting. So there is no question of any problem with these transactions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I hope we have taken almost all the questions and are very well taken and addressed by Tushar sir. So we are grateful to him. Now I request the member of our center, Abhishek Sadhwani, to give the vote of thanks. Sir.
Thank you, sir. I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to our speaker, Mr. Tushar Hemani, for having accepted our invitation to conduct this session. I'm sure each one of us who attended this would have reaped out maximum benefit out of your sea-wide knowledge and experience, sir. We strongly look forward to more strengthened future collaborations and tie-ups. Also, without failing to mention this, we were elated to cater all our guests who joined this session and also invite them to our future sessions, and we'll make sure to keep you updated with the same. Though we mark an end to this session, but we certainly have embarked on a future togetherness where we shall strive to attain knowledge together. Once again, I would like to thank all of you on behalf of Institute of Law, Nirma University and Team CCLS. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you very much to all the participants.
Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Thank you. Over for the day.